Good morning to everyone that's attending from North America, and for our European and Australian audience. We would like to welcome you very much to our overview of combating ransomware in a mainframe context. And with no further ado, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague Gary, and he'll introduce the concepts to you, and we'll have some question and answer at the end. Thank you.
Welcome. Thanks for attending. I hope the COVID restrictions in your country are beginning to ease. They are certainly easing here in Canada, and that's a good thing. Today we're going to talk about a different scourge, and that scourge is ransomware. In particular, we're going to talk about how our mainframe FIM product, FIM Plus, can help you harden your security posture, particularly against ransomware attacks. As a product, FIM Plus is very new, especially in mainframe terms. It's been generally available since 2018 and provides file integrity monitoring capabilities to the ZOS platform that have been available on other platforms for years. Today we'll talk a little bit about the vulnerability of the ZOS platform to malicious ransomware attacks. We'll talk a little bit about how FIM Plus works to level set everyone. Then we'll go over the specific features of FIM Plus which help thwart ransomware attacks. We'll talk a little bit about compliance, and then we'll wrap up. If you have a question, there's a chat box. If you type them in there, we'll answer them at the end of the talk. Ransomware on mainframes, you bet. Can a malicious attack happen on a ZOS mainframe? A presentation was made at Share in 2017 outlining how ZOS was no less vulnerable to an attack than any other platform. The same techniques which bad actors use to compromise other platforms will work on the mainframe. Infected attachments, mimicked websites, even a janitor loading something onto a PC using a thumb drive can all infect a PC or a laptop with this keystroke capture program. The bad guys can use these types of things to collect user ID and password combinations, and voila, they have access. Typically, they then employ techniques to escalate credentials and use utilities like FTP or TN3270, etc. to upload the malware payload. The presenter, Chad Rickensrud, made the point that with blisteringly fast encryption coupled with a centralized catalog structure, if someone got in, the results could be devastating. The other thing that's emerging in the literature on hacking is that ransomware hackers have learned that sites with detection technology like FIM, coupled with good backup and restore capability, can beat them. The takeaway for the hackers was to launch a two-phase attack, compromise the backups first, and then compromise the system. Chad's slides are available on the link shown below. If you get a chance, you should take a look. By the way, we'll make these slides that we are presenting today available to anyone attending. The links for all of the reference material is contained on the slides. With the tried and true conventional security measures, RACF, Top Secret, ACF2, and firewalls, what you're doing is limiting access to known and trusted people. These tools are very good at that. Bad actors can steal credentials, but also previously good employees can succumb to addiction or gambling problems, and then, in order to get money, sell you out. The point here is that insiders are past RACF and the firewall. Although having a bad guy steal credentials or an employee go rogue is a fairly low frequency, again, the consequences can be devastating to your organization. So what can you do to protect your business if you assume that bad actors can get past the access controls and the firewall? A sophisticated hacker will go through some or all of the following steps on the screen on the right-hand side of the screen. The reconnaissance phase is a pre-attack phase where the bad actor will learn everything it can about the target. This may include searching LinkedIn for information on employees of the company, looking for public email addresses, reviewing job postings, press releases, and that kind of thing. They're seeking insiders that may help them and trying to understand if there is a corporate event where if the ransom demand is made at that time, it will cause maximum problems for the corporation. Think about having this happen just as your company is about to close a major deal. Penetration phase is the phase that we talked about previously. The criminals will look for a way to get a user ID and password. Because they have researched the company, they may craft an email that sounds legitimate, but includes a payload which will get them the information they need to get in. The fortification phase, the attackers will try to hide evidence of their entry, establish redundant methods of accessing the device, and investigate methods to infect and compromise system components. In this phase, malware may be loaded onto your system like FTP. The infiltration phase is where the attacker will search out the backup data, seek to gain higher credentials, and identify the files that will cause the maximum disruption to the company if they're encrypted. Spoliation is a fancy word that means to ruin something. In this phase, the hackers will ruin the backups or modify the backup procedures so they appear to work but don't. Finally, after your backups have been compromised, the hacker will encrypt parts of your system, make sure that only they have the decryption key, and then email a ransom demand. Remember, if you pay the ransom, these are bad people. You may or may not get the decryption key to unlock your system. So, how can you counteract these types of threats? If you assume that they can penetrate past RACF and your firewalls, what can you do? FIM Plus helps you in the fortification, infiltration, and spoliation phases of a ransomware attack. The idea being that if you detect the issues, you can thwart the final step of the attack. The rest of this presentation will focus on counteracting these threats and show how state-of-the-art security techniques, which were formerly only available on other platforms, are now available on ZOS. Remember, you can type your questions in the chat box and we'll answer them at the end. We're going to switch gears on you a little bit. We want to level set you with the basics of how FIM technology and our product, FIM Plus, works. This is an overview of how FIM Plus ensures that files haven't changed. FIM Plus is a client-server application. The trust server runs on an LPAR, and the agents can run on the same or other LPARs. The communication between the trust server and the agents is via an encrypted TCP/IP session, so the agent can be on the same or different hardware. The keys are created by the agent and then sent to the FIM Plus server. These keys are a two-part key. They contain a hash made from the contents of the file and a hash made from the metadata of the file. The keys from the initial scan are stored in a vault by the server and a log record is created. By the way, when these initial keys are stored, what you're doing is starting to create a whitelist of the programs you're going to allow to run on your LPAR. We'll talk more about this in a couple of slides. In subsequent scans, the keys are recreated by the agent and sent to the server. And these keys are compared to the ones in the vault. If they are all okay, there's no change of detection, an okay log record is produced and written out to the log. We're going to go over what happens if a change is detected later on in the presentation. Now on to specific ransomware solutions. FIM Plus is a feature-rich product. It's designed to operate in a modern ZOS environment. Maintegrity has taken FIM way beyond creating hash codes and verifying that your files haven't changed. The list on the screen represents the features we have implemented that help you detect and thwart ransomware attacks. We are going to go over these in some detail in the following slides. FIM Plus is a highly automated enterprise system. It will detect changes to files, and then it will enable you to take action automatically via preset action definitions. For instance, and we will go over this, if FIM Plus detects a changed or added file, FIM Plus will initiate actions that you have defined. You may want to check in your change management system to see if a change request exists for this change, and if not, take a more serious set of actions than if one does exist. Because FIM Plus integrates with other tools in your enterprise, it is a really, really powerful ally in your defense against ransomware. Can we go to slide 9 now? Whitelisting is recommended by many organizations as something that should be done to counter ransomware. The reference on the slide is to a U.S. government interagency document written to provide organizations a framework on protecting themselves from these types of attacks. There are quite a number of agencies mentioned on the title page of that document, but they include the FBI, the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and a number of others. What is whitelisting? The definition on the slide is from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST as they are commonly referred to. Basically, a whitelist describes in a baseline the programs that are authorized to run on your processor and notifies you if any of those programs change or if any other programs get added or deleted. In the NIST paper referenced, they do indicate that the best way to implement whitelisting is by using file integrity monitoring technology. They also describe that some of these FIM solutions just detect changes and notify you about the change. But the really good ones detect, notify, and take action. FIM Plus is in the latter category. Al will go into this a bit more later on, but we can quarantine a suspicious file. We could even delete it, although that's probably not your best strategy. These types of actions can be set up to occur when the change is detected without human intervention. In our solution, we do provide some auto-discovery features to help you build baselines on your system software. FIM Plus will auto-discover your APF libraries and your program product libraries, including things like JES, Kix, IMS, DB2, that kind of thing. This technique can automatically start building your whitelist within minutes of product installation. Of course, you can create baselines for in-house developed or purchased applications. Another thing FIM Plus can do is support multiple baselines. Why? Well, if you're rolling out a new version of an application across many LPARs, you may want to have some LPARs on version X and some on version Y during the rollout. FIM Plus has the capability to do that. The benefit to customers of implementing whitelisting is that malware cannot get placed on your system without triggering an alert. This capability provides you with knowledge of change files even when the change was created by a user ID that had the authority. Notifications, including emails and text notifications to your response team, occur automatically so your response can get initiated as soon as changes are detected. Checksums and backups. So the central banks in both North America and in Europe are recommending that banks do checksums on their backups to validate their integrity on an ongoing basis. The Cyber Resilience Oversight document referenced on the slide was created by the European Central Bank in 2018 to provide guidance to member banks on improving cyber resilience. It's a well-written document. If any of you are interested, Maintegrity has written a companion document outlining where we can help in meeting the expectations set out in that document. We'd be happy to share that with you. So we were working with a large Canadian bank to provide them checksums on backups. One of their issues was that they had backup data sets that were a terabyte and more of data. When you go to do a full scan on a terabyte of data, it can take some time. In order to reduce the time to complete a scan on these very large backup data sets, we have implemented the capability to do sample scans. Sample scans will create a hash code from a subset of the data contained in the file. The amount of data sampled in the scan is user specifiable. Every time you create a hash code to verify the file, a new hash code can be created to sample different data from the data sampled in the current scan. You can also have a scan that just verifies the first and last block in the file. This is for virtual tape files only. We run a Z14 processor in our lab. In order to do a full scan on a terabyte of data, it takes between 10 and 12 minutes of CPU time. The sampling scans do not quite reduce corresponding to the amount of data being sampled. In the lab, we were seeing scans that sample 10% of the data take between 1.2 and 1.4 minutes of CPU time, which is slightly more than 10% of the CPU time of the full scan. The scans that sample the first and last block are, however, very fast. As we discussed, because the sophisticated bad guys target backups in the pre-ransom phase of an attack, it's very useful to make sure that your backups have not been tampered with and notify you the second that they have. We think that central banks are particularly worried about backups in major banks because a ransomware attack on a major bank could have a ripple effect throughout the entire financial market infrastructure. Whether sampling scans meet your validation requirements is up to you and your auditors. I'm going to pass this along to Al now, talking some more detail about some of the other features we have to counter ransomware. But before I do that, I would just like to say thanks for listening and stay safe. Al, over to you.
Thanks very much, Gary. That was a really good introduction, and I think for most people, they need to be aware that ransomware exists. It's a new threat. It's probably the easiest one to perpetrate in a current environment, and as a result, we need new solutions for existing problems and new ways of attacking us. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on how FIM works in the real world. So, as Gary explained, the first pass-through creates a baseline. And that baseline is stored on our secure vault. Subsequently, we'll run another scan and we'll compare to those results. And, typically we find that the results haven't changed and everything's fine. But we can confirm that everything is as it should be. So it's absolutely correct. And really, FIM processing is the only way to get to that level. So as time goes on, we continue to run scheduled, random, on-demand detection processes. And frankly, likely things continue to be just fine. However, one day, we actually find that something has changed. Now, what do? Well, the first thing we do is, since we've all got all those success records written to both the FIM Plus database and at the same time in real time to your SIEM monitor, if that's how you have it implemented, we have all those success records. So we know when things were last seen as correct. But this particular case, we find out that something's changed. Now we need to do some investigation. Why did that change? Well, the very first thing we have to do is we have to alert the response team. And we can alert the response team by email or by text. When that email arrives, the response team simply clicks on the email and up pops our GUI. The second that the GUI comes up, we know every component that's been affected. We also know what the attack interval was because it's from the last success record to the current time when we discovered the problem. So a lot of research is already done with one simple click. However, we're going to go and do more logical research. So we do a dynamic query of SMF for the accesses up to the second in real time for the components that were affected, asking the questions, who and what time were these updates made? We don't have to go back to the beginning of time. We know when they were last correct. So all that we have to do is focus on the interval and bring in only those records. As a result, the processing is much lower, but the speed at which you can look through 3 or 4 or a dozen records versus thousands is dramatically different. The next thing we do is we would go out to ServiceNow or Remedy or perhaps your change control information. If that's something that you have in a cloud or in a hosted environment, that's fine. We'll find it wherever that occurs. It could be on a different platform. It could be on ZOS. It could be, like we talked about, in the cloud. In our particular case, our ServiceNow instance is always in the cloud. So we go and look at that. When we see a change that applies to this particular update, a change record, then we go and fetch the information about why that changed so that you can verify the change that took place against the change that was expected. Another way of doing that, of course, is to do a side-by-side compare. So if we're looking at a text member, like a parameter list or addresses in your TCP/IP environment or JCL members or other things that affect the production running of your system, you simply click on the desired item and we compare on the screen in front of your eyes the difference between a baseline and the current copy. And if that difference was perhaps a comment card that had no impact, well then simply you could suppress the event. But if it looks like it's serious and maybe it wasn't approved in the first place, then we might want to go right into starting the recovery process. And when we do that, we have answers, not questions about what happened. That's a significant difference from where the business is today. An additional thing that we bring to the table is real-time processing. Since we can go and get those SMF records in real time, More importantly, since SMF can give us key information on accesses that shouldn't take place, for instance, maybe a backup data set is opened for update. That would probably be a problem because that backup data set should be written once and then never changed. So that kind of real-time processing can kick off an early warning that there are problems in your environment. And once FIM knows that, it can then handle that alert in a standardized process. So perhaps when we get that first alert in real time, you might want to kick off a scan and get an up to the second look at your environment to see exactly what has changed. We have all kinds of information that allow you to filter that based on user ID or on timescale. At the same time, we want to make sure that the response team is up to date. So we send that same email and text to the response team, and of course, they can take the exact same actions as if it was from one of our scheduled FIM runs. So that gives you a new capability in terms of being able to look at everything in your system and protect your points of vulnerability. It's continuous monitoring. It's continuous auditing. So not only do we catch errors, we keep all of the teams informed about what's going on. Executables, JCL, configuration members, backups, even encrypted files can be hashed and checksummed without actually having to unencrypt. So we can have a baseline established for those. USS is another point of vulnerability. We can scan that with our standard product in the ZOS environment. The Express install uses auto discovery to go out and build an initial whitelist for your environment. So we always like to say that the product installs in an hour and that you'll get concrete results in the second hour. That may be a bit of an exaggeration, but it's pretty close. You're going to get that whitelist built automatically for you, and then you're going to be in a position to really be able to protect your system. Using that time after time, we can get closer to our initiative for zero administration. In many respects, having FIM in place and being able to corroborate other information relieves you of a lot of manual work that you have to do today. So it's for faster reaction and less effort. We always look at the performance of our systems, and we do that primarily by offloading to the crypto card. But as Gary mentioned, we offer quick scans, full scans, and sampling scans, all of which give you assurance that your environment is in the manner that you want, and at the same time can be done very quickly. So high availability in the design is built in from day one. Things can be changed on the fly. And it's important that all of these things can be done without administrative overhead. FIM Plus is built for integration. One of the issues with ZOS over the years is that we've allowed silos of information to exist. FIM brings those together, as you have seen already, in a very integrated manner, using the information from multiple sources to correlate. That's important in the same way that it is in the judicial system. We're always looking for corroborating evidence. That'll be important to your auditors. It'll be important in compliance, and it'll be really important in resolving problems before they bite. FIM Plus supports mainframes. It supports the open systems environment. It supports tools that are located in the cloud. And it does that with standard REST APIs. So all of the tools that are already integrated with FIM Plus can be augmented by new tools as we go forward. We provide a variety of different ways to initiate those scans. They can be scheduled. Your auditor might come into your office and say, can you assure me that everything in an application, in the banking application, for instance, is as it should be and all the programs are at the correct levels? Well, you run an on-demand scan and that information will be available to you. But often enough, something as simple as a batch step added to your quality assurance process and or the system startup can provide you assurance every time you start the application up. It supports new and existing staff. Although I'm going to show you in a minute the GUI interface, it also supports a full 3270 interface. So that means if you're comfortable with 3270, that's the interface you should use. If you're newer to the mainframe, or you have other responsibilities on other platforms, you might be more comfortable with the GUI, and that's why it exists. And of course, as we showed you, it supports both real-time emails and text alerts to the response team. That way, we think we can make ZOS the most secure platform in the world. So let's see how that works. Well, when we get an alert, FIM sends a text or an email. We simply, as an administrator person, I come back in here and I go, oh, I'm going to click on that, and click one brings up exactly what the status of all the recent scans are. In this particular case, we've seen that this image copy has a failure, so it has been changed. In stream, it actually goes out to the SMF log files and the buffers in storage and brings in all of the accesses that are associated with that image copy during the interval in which that change had to take place. We know when the last good scan was. That comes from our success records. We know what the time is now when we saw the failure. Therefore, we know the interval. Pretty straightforward and not much data to go through. So then my second click actually goes out, in our case, to the cloud and brings in information about the change. In this particular case, we're saying there was no change. And the ServiceNow configuration information can be built from our discovery scan, or we can use the configuration information that's already in ServiceNow. So the integration is pretty tight, and it means that when I'm in the response team, I can get this information more or less instantaneously. Now I've got real command and control. So what can I do? Well, what can the system do for me is an even more important question. Perhaps you want to suspend that user ID. You suspect that it might be doing bad things. You know who the offender is. So suspend the user ID before any real damage is done. Same thing is true. Gary mentioned quarantine. You know the scope of what happened. Therefore, I can quarantine all the suspect components. That might be important in further analyzing the forensics when you actually have time to ask the question, where did that come from? Now drill down and see where the vulnerability is and plug that hole. But maintaining the context around the changes in quarantine might be quite important in that process. Another thing you might want to do is oversight. Find out what else changed. Up to the second, what has changed in my environment? In many cases where we've seen problems occur and breaches occur, what else changed at the same time? That sometimes takes the entire security team in a room for weeks to just understand what else that person, that rogue employee or hacker might have done while they were in your system. Wouldn't it be nice just to run the oversight report, find out everything that changed, and do it by date, maybe I want to only know what happened in the last few hours, the last few days, or by ID. What the heck else did that offending ID do? In a process, we can do lots of filtering. And the filtering is all about noise reduction. We don't want false positives. In fact, we think that the FIM data allows you to disqualify false positives created from other processes because it can corroborate a key part of the NIST environment and the reaction. Because we have different data sources, we're not subject to bad data because we have two different sources. And we're also not subject to a suspect which doesn't prove out because we just go and see if anything changed. In that process, we eliminate tons of redundant effort. So what's the bottom line here? Well, with FIM Plus and its access and the ability to get the access data from SMF in real time, we can compress the amount of time required to respond from weeks, maybe months, to minutes. Well, why is that? Well, because we're identifying things in real time to start with, so we know a lot sooner. Then we actually send a text. Well, it doesn't take any time, so I can click on that text, and right away, as a responder, I can know who did it. I can know what else they did. I can know when it started. I can actually invoke all those automated forensics I just showed you. And then, although we didn't go over it in this presentation, you can even have us help you with the restore process. Since we know when things were last correct, and we can prove that things got restored correctly, why wouldn't we just build all that JCL for you and allow you to run the restore much more quickly? That means compromised data doesn't live on your system for even a few seconds. And that may well mean that in a classic context where I'm doing those things by hand, when I have to go through and hope my backups are okay, and then figure out who I should call if I've got a problem and who did it and what's the scope. You know, my advice to those people that want to do that by hand in a manually grinding process with even the best skilled people in your company dedicated to that, I'd say one of the key things you have to do is get ready to pay the ransom. So we like to say in our environment, we have knowledge, we combine that with the logical actions that should be taken, and we get avoidance, not ransom. How does that fit with better compliance? Well, we think better security is better compliance. So when we look at the best sources of information on cyber resilience, we go to GDPR, we go to NIST, we go to PCI. We say, why are those requirements in place? Lots of them call for FIM these days. Lots of them call for better detection. And that's what we provide. So this is kind of a high-level look at what the NIST compliance structure is. And simply, you need to identify, protect, detect things more quickly, respond, and recover. FIM plays in much of this area. And actually, it really provides valuable data for your governance environment and for your planning environment as well. But nobody else in the mainframe does checksums. That's a hole we can plug. And that's a really key early warning indicator that you might be about to be ransomed. Same thing is true for contents comparison. We add that to what the capabilities in the NIST protocols and the framework. But it's important that you can do that in order to disqualify false alarms, in order to figure out what the changes are, in order to respond quickly. And the same thing is true in recovery. At the end of a recovery, wouldn't you want to run a verify to make sure that everything is the way it's supposed to be? So when we look at the overall context of what the NIST protocols are put in place to provide and to help with, we strengthen those in many ways. So as you go through your compliance audit, you should be getting an awful lot of check marks, even more than the basics in the framework to begin with. We think that that gets you finished your audits a lot faster with higher performance ratings, and that serves everybody's purposes, both the auditors and the company, because now you're secure. So why do you need FIM now? Because hackers are trying to get into your system daily. And if they aren't today, they probably are tomorrow. Because if you're of any size, they'll see that as a really big prize. And if they can just simply get in there and encrypt some file which has a pain point to it, well, then they're going to make you pay. We avoid that with whitelisting and verified backups. We make sure that those holes are closed now, not when you're trying to deal with a ransom request. Compliance with PCI, NIST, GDPR. That's obvious because the underlying security is much better. So then as you go through your audit, you're just going to get check marks and better scores than you ever have before. You can react in an instant because all that stuff is available to you in real time. And you don't have questions, you have answers. Because it integrates with your existing tool set, you can leverage your existing mainframe investments. And it's really fit for a new generation of support folks, as well as our existing folks that have been around for a long time. But further, it thwarts hackers that are learning as they go along as well. So ransomware is kind of a new threat, and we need to make sure that the pain can be avoided long before the hack takes place. We avoid a manual investigation, which saves lots of time and effort, and we also take action before it's too late. So FIM Plus is both an active tool, a detection tool, and a response tool. So key elements in whatever you're going to have to do. So now let's look at what happens in the context of ransomware. Well, we don't do much about stopping the hackers, the phishing, the malvertisements, the dozens of other ways to gain access to sensitive user IDs and passwords. And frankly, we don't really add a lot of protection for your attached workstations. But the second that starts to affect your mainframe, then we add a lot of protection. Because we're going to go in and we're going to make sure your backups are okay. We're going to make sure that your whitelisted programs haven't changed. So not only do we know the right programs, we know the right levels. We know the right versions. And those can be rolled out into different partitions at different times. Gary went over that. But at the very outset, we protect your system in new ways that haven't existed before. And we send you an early warning if that's the case. But we help you with fast reaction time and forensics and scope analysis when that's required. At the end of the day, that results in this: a prevented ransom attack. So we haven't neutralized the hackers. They're just going on to the next site. They're going to keep being resourceful. They're going to keep being persistent. They're going to pound away. They're going to try and find something sensitive in your environment. It may not be your central database, but it may be something that's painful enough that you're going to have to pay ransom. So now with FIM Plus in place, we can defeat ransomware and we can avoid all kinds of other malicious exposures. With that, I'll kind of wrap things up and we'll go over to questions. But I really want you to think hard about real-time monitoring of backups and what an early warning gives you in the case of ransomware. I want you to think hard about improved security and compliance as your role and your job and important to your organization, but also in the context of saving time and effort and preventing a whole lot of overhead every time there's an audit. And now we're actually going to enable newer staff to make the right decisions in seconds. So it really is about building in the intelligence of 40 years of mainframe experience into software, rather than trying to build 40 years of experience overnight in a newer generation of support staff. So we like to say it'll save time the first day and every day. But at the end of that day, if a problem occurs, who does get hung out? We'd like to offer some next steps. We're very focused on fixing real problems in real customer environments. So we'd like to have more of a discussion-based call with people that are interested in this capability, because then we can understand your environment and we can be much more direct about what it will do for you in everyday life. We also can go through, some training in terms of what's under the covers and the many things that FIM Plus will do for you that we didn't go over this morning. And the last thing, of course, we can do is we can do an express trial. We often find that because we use auto discovery and fast path testing, that can take 7 days or less. So that whole trial process is pretty important in proving out what we just talked about, that FIM Plus and Maintegrity can help you provide a different level of security than what you provide today. So we would encourage you to do one of the express trials on your own system, see how fast it runs, and convince yourself that it covers off many of the things that are left hanging with today's security products. So we think in the long term, mainframes are high value targets, and you need to protect them adequately. Today's products may not be doing that for you. So thanks for your time this morning. We look forward to talking with each of you, or at least many of you, in person about your specific requirements. So please just respond to any of the emails that we've sent, and we'd be happy to set up a tailored discussion with you to see how FIM Plus can help you. Thanks very much.